Welcome to the 50 Shades of Arab podcast. I'm your host, Fareed Farkawi. Thank you for tuning in to today's topic, mental health, shame, and stigma. Joining us are Mira, Dalia, Amal, and Hanadi. We may have additional guests joining us midway through, but for now, these are our guests. So Dr. Mira Yassin is actually Palestinian and has worked as a nurse since 2009 in the areas of women's health, neurology, neurosurgery, intensive care, medical, surgical, and mental health. She's completed her doctorate of nursing practice as a family nurse practitioner, and then completed a postdoctorate psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner certificate program. She's done global health and refugee health in Palestine, Jordan, and Greece, and provided care to people in underserved areas locally and abroad. Currently, Dr. Yassin is an assistant professor in the East Tennessee State University College of Nursing undergrad programs, and she practices as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner on Wednesdays and student health on campus. Her research interests include health-related quality of life and life stressors for refugees, adverse childhood experiences, trauma-informed care, and health disparities for vulnerable populations. Dalia Murad joins us. She's Egyptian, studies psychology and biology at Rutgers University, and currently getting her master's in clinical mental health counseling at Northwestern University. She's worked at group homes with clients with co-occurring disorders, but their primary diagnosis is schizophrenia. She's also interned at Care Plus, which is a community mental health center, and was interning in their children and family department. And she will actually be starting an internship for her master's program in September at a clinic where she will be seeing her own clients. We also have Amal Abdel Fattah, and her father's side of the family is actually Palestinian, and her mother's side is half Caucasian and half, excuse me if I say this wrong, is it Muskogee Indian, and she moved between living in Philadelphia and Jordan most of her life. She graduated from Temple University, yay Temple, in 2016, and is now a recreation therapist at Penn Medicine and Jefferson Hospitals, as well as a translator on the side. Her sister Hanadi joins us, and she's originally from Philadelphia. Right now she's a student at the Community College of Philadelphia and studying communications in the hopes of becoming a magazine editor someday. These days she is babysitting and also very artistic and loves to bake in her spare time, and very creative, humorous, and fabulous. So the reason we have these particular guests with us is either they are experts in the field of mental health, or they are studying to be experts in the field of mental health, or they have experienced mental health issues of their own to talk about as members of our community. As well as I will be sharing my own personal experiences with the topic. So, I would love to start by hearing some of your varied opinions on why is it our Arab community struggles with such public stigma when it comes to mental health. I believe as a community we tend to sweep it under the rug. A lot of my research they say it's God's will, or God will fix it if you just pray hard enough, and and that's not always the case. I mean, we saw, and they're not members of the Arab community or anything, but we saw news about Kate Spade and then Anthony Bourdain, and these are really well-known people in the community who are successful, who struggle with depression, and many didn't know. And so people don't understand it, but there is this type of misunderstanding, whether it's outside our community and definitely within. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share with that?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. So, a lot of what I see is people having a general misunderstanding or not a clear understanding of the fact that it's a brain-based disorder, a lot of times with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar disorder, with schizophrenia. And I tell people when they're afraid of taking medications, because as a nurse practitioner, I prescribe medications, I assess, diagnose, and treat people with mental illness. And so people are afraid because they don't understand that if you have diabetes, you take medication for diabetes, or if you have hypertension, they don't understand that the brain is an organ just like anything else. And there's the fear of being called majnoon, or the fear of
crazy in Arabic.
Yeah, just the stigma associated with, I think we'll be talking about later, with people not wanting to be labeled or have someone in their family with it. Right. And I think a lot of times people don't know who to talk to because they may not know that there's different resources available things like that. So
Right.
let you all add on to that.
Yeah, like I couldn't agree more. I actually had made a note where I was saying how, like, people who have cancer, nobody says to them, just pray to God, and you know, it'll automatically go away. So when it comes to mental health, I feel like because it's something that's not tangible, they just don't understand it. There's not, you can't just go get a blood test and they tell you like,
Right.
oh, you like you were diagnosed with depression or you have anxiety. So to them, it's just so hard to understand that.
Right.
So I feel like it's so easy to just sweep it under the rug and be like, oh, just go pray to God. God
Yep.
will help you. That's
Yep.
that's the only thing that you can do.
Or like, you'll get over it. You just need to be stronger.
Exactly.
You need
Yeah,
to be
you're not
stronger. Suck
strong
it
enough
up.
in your
A lot,
face.
Like, suck it
I
up.
feel like what I've heard the most was always like, oh, well, you must be doing something wrong, so like God is punishing for you,
Yeah.
or like, you know what I mean, or you're
That's
hiding
true.
something, so like
Yeah.
this is just so like your unconscious like telling you you're doing something wrong or you're hiding it, so this is
Which
what's
essentially
coming
makes
out.
it worse. Like it's
Exactly.
putting the blame on the person that's essentially a victim in this
Yeah.
in this scenario, where it's like now you feel worse because you're like, man, what am I doing wrong? But you're not. Sometimes you're not necessarily doing anything wrong. It's just you need the right type of treatment or the right type of diagnosis.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
like you said, like labeling is such a scary thing because there's no shades of gray in our culture. Like everything is literally like black or white. Either you're sane or you're crazy.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And then it just ruins things from then on because we are a very family-oriented culture. So it's like you're gonna make our family look bad. You're not. No one's gonna want to marry you. No, like it's just this like it comes with so much different type of like. It affects so many different types of avenues for the person that they'd rather just hide it or quietly suffer. And I just think that's so wrong.
Yeah, so it's like in our family, one of the biggest things was how my brother was diagnosed with ADHD, and my mom being that era of, you know, she doesn't come from a background where it's as stigmatized, I guess you could say. So I remember she always told us like when I told your father he had XYZ, my dad was like, my son doesn't have that. He doesn't need that stuff. There's nothing wrong with my son.
Mm-hmm.
And up until now, we're still dealing with the after effects of that. And it's, yeah.
No, I totally understand because, for example, like I went through something personal and I ended up seeing a therapist for 6 months, more so because I just needed someone to talk to outside my family. And till today, like my family just doesn't understand it. Like they're just like, why?
Yeah.
Like why'd you go share your business with someone? I'm like, I just needed someone to talk to, someone that was an expert in the field that could say like, no, like what you're feeling is normal. Like you're totally okay. And I just needed that type of reassurance from like a person that did not know me.
Yeah.
So
So that's another. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just was gonna say that's another thing where like people don't need to know our business. You know, just pray to God. You know, Allah beautiful chest is the biggest thing. Or like
Yeah.
God will show you. You know the right way or whatever. Like just keep praying. Or then at that point, some people will start even questioning their faith, and then you're just like, well, we're not Muslim or Christian enough. Like,
Yeah.
you know. And then that starts to become way more tied up into like like you said, I feel like it's gonna just make things so much more worse. As, you know,
Yep.
but you know we don't believe in quote unquote depression or anxiety or ADHD or schizophrenia or you know all these other disabilities that we encounter, especially in our community, especially in oppressed Arab communities like such as Palestinians, you know, where we're going through PTSD. PTSD now is a huge thing in Gaza, especially Gaza, but especially for a lot of Palestinians in general. And how do you explain PTSD to? How do you tell them like, you know, a child was dreaming of like a bomb going off, and and they got up, and then you have. Oh, well, let me just pray. Let me just be like, oh, Bismillah, you know, but you got to do more than that. You got to understand that this is a serious thing and it's going to hinder so many other things in this child's life or, an adult or whatever. But yeah, so.
It's a reaction of their brain to the experiences that they've had. And that stays with them until it's
Exactly.
been processed to be healed.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Something else I experienced is when we were little, we lived in Jordan, and I used to go to the school there, and I had I still have epilepsy, but like we know it's epilepsy. When I was little, we didn't know it was epilepsy, and when I was in school, they used to hit me for it because they thought I was possessed by the devil.
Oh,
They would say that they were like, "You're possessed by the devil," and then they took me out.
It's like a Jinn position.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was an actual thing. Like
Yeah.
And then they used to pull me out of classes without my mom's permission
Mhm.
and like rub me in olive oil, and I was like, I remember
Yep.
being so scared.
Yeah,
I was like,
it's
what
scary.
is this?
How old were you?
Like 4 or 5.
Yeah, no, that's
I was
tough.
really little.
That's tough.
Yeah.
It's because it's like there's so many questions around it. You just if you don't understand something, it becomes like fear based. It becomes a fear. Like, and that's why, like, in the hopes of this podcast, the more people understand it, the more people will be less fearful of it.
Mhm.
Or if they're like struggling with it, then they'll be like, oh, I'm either not the only one, or I can go seek out help for it, whether medication or just talking to somebody. Sometimes you can just talk through something and then understand it a little better. And that's what happened to me when I went to therapy, where like some things I had question marks about in terms of my own like divorce and stuff, but they kind of made it where I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense, and like you just kind of like can wrap your head around it a little better. Like luckily I was one of those people that didn't need medication, but I've seen people that need it and thrive off of it, to be honest. People that are really close to me that no one even knows they struggle with, but they've trusted me with that information, and it's funny because they're just high functioning people, but they're like, no one knows what's hiding behind closed doors. They don't know that I take medicine every day, but I'm able to function and work and thrive and succeed. And I've seen people are like on top of their A game or like in the top of their field, but no one has any idea that they have something and they're treating them for it. And that's really what I want people to get out of this is like, it's okay if you have something going on. You can get treatment. You can still be like everyone else. You can still be like everybody else. So that's really what it comes down to. But yeah.
Yeah, it took me years to understand that. My parents are divorced, and so I moved out, and then my mom always told me she knows. You need anger management. That's just another thing of like dealing with, I guess very strict families, or everything's haram, or et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
But I was like, me anger management? No. And then literally about 7 years later, I'm able to admit that, you know what, maybe I do need some help. Maybe I should, go to therapy. Maybe I should go, because even me, I was like, there's nothing wrong with me. Like, it's.
But see, you just said it wrong, right?
Yes,
There's nothing wrong with me. But essentially what you're saying is like, because someone's labeling you as like you're having trouble processing your angry emotions,
Right.
you're immediately something's wrong with you. But why isn't that the case? Maybe we just didn't
There's
learn how to
always a negative
process it.
connotation.
Yes, I'm like, maybe we just didn't learn how to process said emotions, and sometimes we need a little help with that. Sometimes people figure it out on their own. I don't want to take anything away from that, but sometimes we need a little guidance. Like I think some people I know probably need some assistance, but they don't want to admit it to themselves, and it's one of those things that you have to be able to admit it to yourself to get the necessary help, and not a lot of people in our community want to do that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to say, because we have this, the other thing that's in our culture is like, your problem is not your problem. Your problem is everybody's problem.
else's problem.
We are very nosy people.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is like, I actually sought out my therapy on my own. Did not even tell my family until like I was doing it for like at least like 3 months. And I wasn't going to let them deter me from it, but at the same time, it was one of those things where I did it on my own, which was very not the norm, where they're like, because you have to have like, not permission, but you have to have some sort of acceptance. And that's the other thing is like, sometimes you can recognize something that you need that others in your family do not. Can anyone attest to that? I don't know if you guys had, people that you treated that you felt that with, where they're like, they feel like they need the help, but then their family's like, no, or vice versa, where their family's like, you need help, but they're like, no.
Well, I've seen, I guess maybe you could say both ways, and part of the stigma I will say is the self-stigma, but I've had clients that have been on medications for bipolar disorder and then been off their medications, and the family was the one to recognize you do a lot better in your life and you function better when you're on your medications.
Right.
And finally able to work with the person to get them to feel supported enough to take their medications again. But then I've also seen the self-stigma to where we're always afraid of, well, what are other people going to say? But then I've had clients say, I don't want to be on medications because then that means I'm acknowledging that I'm sick or that there's something wrong with me or that I have mental illness.
Right.
And so sometimes they just feel shame related to that.
Okay.
So I've seen it from both sides, whether it's from the person themselves wanting to be on medicine, but then other people saying, you're weak, why do you need medicine? Or you're already in therapy, why do you need medicine? So
Right.
I guess from both aspects I've seen it, but every person has to just figure out what's right with them and hopefully have a good support system, because that makes a big difference in their outcomes especially.
Right. No, and that's the thing. Like, I think it's more like being able to you have to establish one of two things, right? It's either you have to establish the confidence to do something like that on your own, or you have to establish the support within your network to do something like that with that support network.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, actually, as I was doing research, there's not a lot of research about mental health within the Arab community, but I did find some really interesting things, which is men struggle more than women to admit certain things, which I found funny because I think we also come from a very macho culture.
Yeah.
So they feel like it's weak if you admit that there's something off about you. But I find that, like, if you're seeking out help, it actually makes you quite strong to be able to admit something like that. It doesn't take anything away from you. So I guess, like, what are your take on men that struggle over women? And the other thing I found is that a lot of them don't, because of marriage prospects. They fear that they won't be a marriageable person if they have something labeled onto them like that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's an idea that's like instilled in us.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like even when I was originally telling my family, like, oh, I want to go into psychology and that's what I want to do, I wasn't even saying necessarily that I'm seeking out a therapist or that, like, something, you know what I mean? Or that, like, I'm going for something personal. But it was just the idea behind psychology in general and mental health in general, where everybody was like, you're not going to find a husband. Nobody's going to want, somebody who's in that field or whatever it is. And it's such a weird idea to me, that whole thought process. I don't understand it at all, and I try so hard to, but it just makes no sense to me.
That's kind of like going into recreation therapy. Where it's not very common, so briefly talk about what it is. It's just like a kind of activity-based therapy for all types of populations, whether it's mental health, whether it's behavioral, whether it's physical rehab, which is where I work in now. But anyway, when I told my dad recreation therapy, he's like, "Shoot, recreation therapy, you don't have to do the doctora, like go become a doctor of some sort." And I'm just like, and it's like,
Doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yeah,
that's the three. That's the three. Doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Exactly. And it's like, and those are the people that will heal you, not therapists. You know.
Yep.
So that's kind of like his thought. What therapy, So, and going back to men having in our community having these issues, like my brother being one of them, where it's like there's no way that he was ever going to be able to admit it. My dad, the same way. Like, there's no way that it's like, there's no such thing. So what are you talking about, Mom?
Doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I'd rather say it doesn't exist than acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to bounce off of what you said. In the research, it says that many Arabs are more likely to seek out their primary care physician for such things, not for mental health issues, but they will come up. They said, perfect examples, like a woman who's had a baby and struggling with postpartum depression. At the 6-week mark, you have to do a questionnaire and all that fun stuff. So what do you think about the research? And do you think, what do you think we can do as a community to help primary care doctors better understand their Arab patients and how to approach them? Because, say we can't get people to go to a mental health specialist, can we develop some sort of relationship and trust with our primary care doctors where more people can actually feel comfortable enough to share or get diagnosed? Or, because like you said, like, there's this respect with doctors that you won't find, like, mental health, that doesn't exist, So that's the other thing. Oh, I had the...
No, go ahead. No, I'd actually like to talk a little bit about the medication aspect. First of all, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm not from Philly.
Yeah,
but,
that's okay.
It's always the first thought where the doctors would right away prescribe medication. I think it's really important that they try to do a complete checkup about everything from top to bottom, A to Z. I don't know if you've heard about the story of the world-renowned doctor, the Syrian doctor, Dr. Sohail Najjar, who saved one of the patients. They didn't know, she was completely normal. They didn't know what was going on with her, and she could have ended up in a mental ward for the rest of her life. But he was the one who detected that she had some sort of inflammation in the brain that was causing all those psychotic or schizophrenic, I'm not sure exactly what it was. But before rushing into medication, they really need to look at that complete
I
checkup
agree with
aspect
you.
before anything. That's one thing that I just wanted to add.
Actually, so I'm going to speak of my own personal experience. During my early stages of marriage, I was encouraged to see a therapist because it turns out I had hypothyroidism, which is very common in women our age. And if anyone knows, hypothyroid is basically an underactive thyroid, and one of the symptoms of untreated hypothyroidism is depression. So I was feeling really down. I didn't know what was wrong. Like I physically could not get myself out of bed. But once I found out, you have to adjust the thyroid medicine. It's just like a little pill that you take every day. And I believe that it's an emotional thing because I was always super healthy until then, or like stress related. And as women during that time of our life, we tend to increase our levels of stress. But I remember seeing this therapist at encouragement of someone I knew, and he sat with me for an hour, okay? An hour. And I remember I just had a conversation like I'm having now. I was telling him, look, I've had a lot of change in my life really quickly, and I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I don't know. I wasn't even emotional. I was just talking to somebody. And he says, I think you should go on antidepressants. And I was like,
No, really.
like it took me aback. I was like,
Right.
what? I was like, okay. I was like, that's pretty strong for for someone that. And they were like, he was like, no, I think it's just you're not looking at it from a scientific base. It's, you're going to increase the dopamine in your brain and you're going to be happier and all this stuff. So I remember I asked someone that I knew, and he was very encouraging. He was like, no, you should try it. If that's what the doctor says, you should try it. I mean, I tried it maybe for 2 weeks, and I was like, this isn't really doing much for me. Like, I don't feel any different.
You
And then-
take 6 weeks anyway for medicines to work.
Yeah, even though like
So you
in
didn't
my
get
mind
help
I was like I'm
from-
already treating my thyroid, which I feel like that's really what the key was. But I just was like, I don't know, like I don't feel like I need this. So like luckily for me, I found out I was pregnant. I was like, I'm not gonna take this anymore. So, and I never really had to be on that stuff. But what's funny is when I saw that therapist after my divorce for 6 months, I remember he wrote me like a note, and he was just like, you are not depressed. He was like, you're not depressed. Because the other guy wrote that I had a major depressive chronic condition. So I don't know if anyone knows what chronic means. Chronic means lifelong. Like, I'm like, I was like, I mean, I think I know myself. And I literally had to go to that therapist for 6 months being like, am I crazy? Like, I'm just not seeing it. I was like, I don't understand. But it's funny because it ended up being that he was like, no, you're not depressed and you're not anxious. You're just really stressed. He's like, you're under an immense amount of stress. So, and that's why I was like, I've seen you for 6 months, and for you to tell me that in your profession, that makes me feel more comforted than a guy seeing me for an hour and being like, you need to take medicine. And it's like, and I just found it to be lazy doctoring, to be honest with you. Don't throw it's not that I don't believe in medication when needed, but to come to that result, you need to sit with someone multiple times to say like, you need this medicine, which is a pretty strong medicine with side effects. I mean, I know someone that unfortunately like took his life after being on antidepressants. That's how strong those side effects can be. So it's terrifying. So yeah, I totally understand your point of view because I saw it firsthand where I'm like, where certain doctors, I'm like, you're abusing your license by doing that to people. But then you see people that are like, no, I'm going to take my time getting to know you, and then being like, no, you don't need anything. You just needed you needed an event. Like you needed an outlet. Like, you know what I mean? So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
I could definitely elaborate later a little bit more later on. about, side effects.
If you'd like to, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, some of the side effects too that my son is struggling with, and at this point I'm really not sure if this was something that was triggered by medication side effects or if that's like an underlying condition. I don't know yet. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm doing my own research, and I'm definitely going to make an appointment with Dr. Sohail Najjar because he's a great neurologist.
Yeah.
Also, I'm seeking homeopathy,
Nice.
natural, means of, addressing those side effects without any side effects. So pray for me. Maybe we could be back on that show and see how it works out later on.
Yeah, that would be
But
great.
it's the
I was
worst-
telling them that we're going to hopefully have future episodes on these things,
Yeah,
just because, time is limited, of course. But I was going to say that homeopathic remedies, so with thyroidism, like hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism, it's interesting. I've seen people that were on it and then no longer need it. Because I do believe after my own research, I'm like, two things affect it is like taking care of yourself, good sleep, good diet, which I don't do. I'm so sorry. I don't. I wish I had time. I need time. I need more time. I was like, I need more time in my day. But it's one of those things that I have seen people not need that medicine anymore. I mean, it doesn't like hurt me to take the medicine every day.
Right. Don't get me wrong, I'm not always against medication.
Yeah.
I mean, it works for my other son who's autistic, although there could be a better route, but I'm not experimenting with that right now.
Right.
But I'm just
Right.
focusing on my other son who's had some
But
complications.
no, I totally like. I just wanted to kind of like elaborate that I do agree with you that sometimes that is a route to
Yes.
take. And I do believe like because I remember I asked my primary care doctor. I said, "Do you think that the hypothyroidism is like stress induced or emotional or whatever?" Because I have seen that in my research. He's like, "Oh no, I don't think so." But I don't. To be honest, like I respect my doctor, but I just
Stress
don't
has a
agree
lot to do with
because
it,
I've seen people that are like, "No, I don't take the medicine anymore. I don't need to because my stress levels decreased." Yoga and this and that. I'm like, so I've seen people be able to manage that kind of stuff. And I will say, I was talking about like the postpartum depression questionnaire. I think it's very like. I think I was suffering from it a little bit, but the questionnaire is like 10 questions. So you just go, duh, 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 okay, have you thought of harming your child? No, but that doesn't mean that I'm not still struggling with some form of depression. And so many women I know have dealt with that, but never even knew what it was. And some can last months, a year. Like it's scary because you feel so detached from your emotions during that time when really you should be so attached to your emotions because you just brought a life into the world. But it's one of those things that like, no, I think it's actually something that people talk about outside of our culture where they're saying, I don't know if someone said that they're going to be doing the postpartum screening earlier than the 6 weeks now. I think I read that somewhere. I don't know if you've
I've
heard
heard
of this.
that too.
Right? Yeah, and I was like, that's really cool because I know that, you know, those first like 3 weeks where you're like, oh my God, there's a child here. That's like I'll never forget it. Like the first night, I heard a baby crying. I was like, oh my God, that's mine. I have to wake up. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where as a mental health conversation, there is a bigger one at hand right now with the entire country. And we see how it's affecting where it's like school shootings and like it's affecting so many things that it needs to be discussed at length. But I was going to say another avenue I was thinking about is do you think educating Arabs on mental health through their places of worship? What do you guys think about that?
I think
It's a great
that's
idea.
important. It's very important because kind of tying it in with the places where people spend the most time, they may be more likely to see their primary care provider than a specialist. They may be more likely for children to spend more time in schools or people going to places of worship. And the concept of trauma-informed care is so important, especially right now, that I feel like all people of faith, all people in the community who work with children, with families, need to have that training to understand just even things that we don't think about in being able to explain, like when a person is just stressed out versus when they have mental illness that needs professional treatment. What to do if someone comes to the preacher or to the imam or to any of the religious figures and say, I'm having thoughts of hurting myself. I know that this is against the religion, but I'm still having these thoughts. What do I do? They need to be aware of that, and they need to be able to help the people who are coming to them. So that is definitely very important.
And this is a great point you raise, and one of the other things I'd like to add, which is very important, is some of these kids, they're very vulnerable at a certain age, especially where 8th grade, and it starts 8th grade, when they want to experiment with other things, and they'll start, you know, and this is something I had no idea about, and later as a mother I've discovered, but I don't know which world I was living in any case, they start getting the street marijuana, right, which is laced with chemicals, and they self-medicate themselves, right? And so there needs to be that education for the parents and for the kids, because that street marijuana that's laced with chemicals actually induces horrible side effects, and they could be permanent.
K2, yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's scary.
And so that's something else that I would like to, you know,
Absolutely.
add to.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point. I didn't even think of that. Now that I have my kid, I'm like, just stay home.
Don't give them
Homeschool.
cash.
They're gonna get homeschooled. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I've taken a mental health first aid training to become an instructor, and that's one avenue that I feel like would be a way to reach out to people and to start having these conversations about mental health, whether it's training the people in the religious institutions people in universities who work with students, even law enforcement, for example.
Yeah.
Training the law enforcement to say if a person is having a mental health condition, how should you approach them versus, anybody else.
Right.
Because
That's
you can be
actually
more
excellent.
traumatizing to them if you don't know what's the appropriate way to interact.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
Lack of training. That's actually such a good point. I think there's
Mhm.
lack of training in our working professionals too.
Yeah.
It's not just
Exactly.
the people.
And I don't
That's
think
a way
it's-
to expand the awareness and to help, not only so that you're not further traumatizing people, but so that the people that are in contact with children, with families, with the community are able to then not only know how to help them, but to get them to the appropriate resources.
That's true.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, it's just not our Arab community, but I think it's
That's
everyone
what I'm
in
saying.
general.
It's
Yeah.
everyone that's
It
struggling
is,
with
exactly.
it. You know, we have this. I was just saying, like we had. That's why the title episode is like it's shame and stigma because we have like more of it just because of our culture being a little bit works a little differently. But no, it's seriously a huge conversation that needs to be had on on a national and global scale. To be honest. Yeah, so actually, we've touched on so many great topics. Does anyone have any type of, I guess, like, situation they want to share, or story they want to share, or something that they feel like would be of value to our listeners? I have an example, but it's not my example to tell, but I knew someone that actually was quite scary, but by chance found out that he was being hospitalized for I don't say panic attack, or he was having a breakdown. It turns out he was bipolar. But then it kind of we only found out about it by chance, and his family was super trying to hide it from even their extended family, and wanted to sweep it under the rug. But I remember I had seen him a week prior, and he was having kind of a mental break in that moment, and then it kind of brought me back, and I was like, oh, that's what it was, because he was very hyper, very animated, very hyper, but in a manic sense. And it was quite scary, and it was concerning. But to be hospitalized, that's a really good thing. I'm sad that his family felt the need to hide it, and especially because he was already married. So it was one of those things where you're I wish the conversation changes where it's no, this is something that he's struggling with. In case anyone else deals with it, they know. I never even recognized it until I knew what it was that he was diagnosed with. Then I'm oh, that behavior makes much more sense to me. Versus I was just man, I'm tired. How's he still going? So that, and then for example, we were talking earlier about the difference between sadness and depression. People can't really associate. We use depression as such a
Broad term.
Exactly.
broad term. It's a cultural word now. Oh man, I'm so depressed. But essentially, I realized that what I was feeling in my times of divorce or whatever, it was actually sadness, because when I did feel depressed, it is a shift. Because I want to say I'm pretty self-aware as a person, but I was man, even the littlest things were a struggle to me. Getting ready for work was a struggle. I didn't really go. I didn't want to go.
Disruption in function is a huge indicator that you're having clinical mental illness versus just feeling a little bit sad or just feeling a little bit situational anxiety.
Right, and didn't want to see anybody. Didn't feel like eating. You just didn't feel like doing anything. And it's scary. I remember it was one of those short periods of time. It was maybe lasted me a week, but I just remember there was a shift. Same thing with anxiety. We use that word so often, but until I actually I've had 2 anxiety attacks in my life, and I knew they were because it was unlike anything I'd felt. It was literally the lungs were sucked, the air was sucked out of my lungs, and I was forced to do because I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Wow.
And it was scary because it happened to me by myself. I was by myself when it happened.
Oh my goodness.
And I was oh my God, do I have to go to the hospital? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, to be honest.
I think something similar happened to me. It was during the Y2K, if all of you remember, and I had to come up with all the mutual fund NAVs, and it had to be done before midnight, because midnight everything was going to change. We're no longer in the 1990s, now it's going to be 2000s, right? So I felt exactly the same way.
Yeah.
I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands were numb, they were frozen. They gave me sugar and they took me to the hospital, and the doctor said something about anxiety attack, or when the brain doesn't get enough sugar, it acts weird.
Hypoglycemia.
Yeah, I was fasting that day too.
Oh, that might have a part to
So-
it to it too. Yeah, I mean, I had a coworker once. I walked in on her. It was scary because she was in the dark, and she was hugging a pillow. And I was oh my God, what are you doing? And then she's I'm having I'm having an anxiety attack. I just need to be alone. Like she recognized it within herself. I think she'd had them before, but I'd never seen it. So I was like, okay, well, if you need anything, I'm here. Like I kind of wanted to be like, if you need anything, I'm here, and I walked away. But these things happen because we also live in a society where everyone lives behind a screen. That's another thing to talk about, which is, increase of bullying, increase of people having this thing that I hate is having no filter, but really you're just being mean.
Yeah.
Like there's a difference between having no filter and being like funny or like, whatever about it, but it doesn't give you an excuse to be mean to people. And I think people are using that as an excuse lately, and I just can't stand it. So it's definitely one of those things where I think mental health issues are becoming more of a forefront because people are struggling with the way the culture is changing around us pretty rapidly. I mean, there's positives to this internet technology, but there's some negatives too. So, and we see it increase in teen suicide and even within our own culture, actually. So, that's the other thing to keep in mind. Does anyone else have anything they want to share or add to our topics?
I have something. When I was in 6th grade, my parents put me in Islamic school, but
Okay.
it was like the daytime school, not like Sunday.
Okay.
And I had to have IEP because I have learning disability,
Okay.
and then they didn't have it. Like they didn't have that program for
This was
children.
in Jordan?
No, this was here.
Really?
But it's run by a lot of Arabs, and which is not good because you could be dyslexic or whatever, and they don't
They won't even
they don't
recognize it.
Wow.
acknowledge it as anything.
Yeah, I mean, I work at a college, and we have we have an actual student support and disability services for people with IEPs. They bring in their documentation. We share it with the professors that they go to. Like, it's a serious thing, but
There's actually no counseling in that school either. I went there
There's no count.
because I came back from Jordan. I was living in Jordan, 9th grade, 8th and 9th grade, and then I came back, and my dad kind of just put us in at the Islamic school, and just when she mentioned IEP, it's just like in general, disability in general. If you can't see it, if it's not physical, then it's not there. So that was another thing. Like there's no counseling services, there's no advising services, there's no IEP, there was no one you could talk to. Oh, maybe you can schedule time with the imam downstairs. Oh, so I can be told, oh, just pray about it. Like, which it goes back to like trainings. It's so important if we can bring training to like these mosques or churches or wherever anyone goes to, and actually educate the leaders. And not just the families that come there, but the leaders that are responsible for giving lectures, giving talks, and I know like a lot of couples who are going through a lot of things, they go to the imam, to resolve their problems, but like my parents and but it always went back to pray about it, and another thing is I remember when we were kids, I think Kennedy was too young, or I don't know, you were born yet, but we ended up in a women's shelter because my parents didn't, it was just, their relationship was horrible. So I remember my mom said, my brother kept crying at one point. He just kept crying. He just wanted his father, my dad, and all this other stuff. And then they actually put my mom in touch. Well, this is us living in the women's shelter. They put my mom in touch with an imam. And we were like, well, we want you to talk to imam and see if he can help you. The only thing that he said was go back to your husband because that's what he needs. Yeah. And
Yep.
and that's what
that frustrates me.
yeah, and it took my mom 23 about something years to realize she needs to officially leave, and because she's just like, and she told me, she's like, I was naive, when we were in that women's shelter, and I listened, and my mom's a convert, so she became Muslim, so she's thinking, oh, well, this is just about being Muslim too, so maybe I should listen to this imam and go back to my husband, even though we were there for a couple months in the shelter, and so my parents were on and off for years until she realized, like, this is affecting all of us. It's not affecting.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a domino effect, especially if it's in the family. It goes from the parents to the kids to relationships that the kids start having, which I'll admit my anger has affected you know, my relationships, this guy was just interested in, and we were talking for about 6 months, and it's just me who just like, you know, and I think
Yeah, it leaves you with some emotional trauma.
Yeah.
Like, I believe it or not, my divorce, like, you know, our culture, like, they're like, you know, you stay for the kid. It's the reason I left is for the kid. Like, I sat there and I was like, I can't have him grow up in a miserable marriage, miserable mother. I said, it's just not going to work for me. You know, and it was a really hard choice to make. I mean, I'm sure your mom knows, like, making the decision to divorce is the hardest decision to make. But my son is very young, but he's happy. He knows he's loved by both sides. His dad and I get along really well now. So it's like really, and I do it for him.
Right.
Everything is for him. So it's one of those things where, you know, it's kind of like one of those things where it's very unlike what we do in our culture, because I've seen older generation couples stay together for the kids, and then you see these bad marriages, bad relationships, and you're like, it affects me worse than if you guys just divorced.
We'd be like, well, we wish you guys just divorced. It's better for us.
You know, I had an uncle come up to me and said, I am so proud of you. He goes, I'm so proud of you. You had the courage to do what maybe like all of us should have done.
Yeah.
But I'm like, well, thank you. Actually, I cried when he said that to me, because it meant a lot to me, because I was like in a really tough spot, and for him to like reassure what I said or what I did.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like I always say, like, thank God I had a really great support system, and I always say, like, in my darkest of times, my truest of friends revealed themselves. The other thing we were talking about, I'm going to touch on this in case anyone's listening, but please don't think this affects your marriage prospects. Anyone who doesn't want to be with you because you sought help to try to improve your life, you don't want to be with that kind of person anyway. And I know we talked about that. You don't want to be with that kind of human being. And I mean, the conversation's been really wonderful, but we do have to start wrapping it up. We will have hopefully future episodes about it. I do want to say, for anyone listening, if they're struggling with anything, there is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. It's not just for suicide. If you just need anyone to talk to, those people do that for a living. And just be kind. Just be kind to each other, and just be there for each other. Sometimes if someone is struggling with something and knows there's someone they can always reach out to, that like makes your life a whole lot better. So thank you so much for our guests and joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Next time we're gonna have some men join in on the topic. I know we're all ladies today, but you know.
Good start.
Yes, exactly. So please visit our website, 50shadesofarab.com, to access the podcast, and our 50 Shades of Arab YouTube channel to access the video we recorded today. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we look forward to catching you on a future episode. Bye-bye.
وانتم كمان لكم صوت ولكم رأي. اللي حابب انه يشارك ويكون جزء من هاي الحلقات فيكم تتواصلوا معي على الايميل المبين على الشاشة، وما تنسوا انكم تتركوا لنا تعليقاتكم وتعملوا لايك وشير وسبسكرايب على قناة اليوتيوب. بنشوفكم الحلقات القادمة.